away a bad page. Instead, he'd fold it neatly and put it in a drawer. Even the wrong words got me closer to the right ones, he explained. That taught me something important. Mistakes aren't waste, they're stepping stones. Even now, I keep my own bad pages just to remember the path they built. Sometimes I'd fall asleep in the attic while he typed. The hum of his work was like a lullaby. I'd wake to find a blanket draped over me, the lamp still glowing, and the faint smell of fresh ink in the air. It felt safe, like the whole world could crumble outside and we'd still be okay in that little room. One day he told me he used to dream of being a journalist. Life didn't work out that way, but he said it didn't matter. I got to tell my stories, and that's what counts. It made me think about how dreams can change shape, but still keep their core, the part of them that makes your heart beat faster. There was an old chair by the desk, its cushion worn thin from years of use. I once suggested getting a new one. He shook his head. This chair knows my stories. It's heard every word before it hits the page. I laughed at the idea, but deep down I liked thinking objects could hold memories too. We kept a small radio in the attic, and sometimes we'd play old songs while he worked. He said certain melodies unlocked doors in his mind. I noticed how the rhythm of his typing would match the beat, like the music and words were dancing together. Those were the warmest afternoons of my childhood. One story he wrote was about a boy who could hear people's thoughts, but instead of using it for secrets, he just listened to their happiest memories. Everyone needs someone who remembers the good for them, Grandpa said. That story stayed with me, a quiet reminder of the kind of person I wanted to be. Some evenings, the sunset would turn the attic walls a deep orange. He'd pause, hands resting on the keys, and just look at the light. You can't write this kind of beauty, he'd say. You just have to feel it. Then he'd go back to typing, somehow putting that exact feeling into his next paragraph. We had an unspoken rule. No one else came into the attic when he was writing. It wasn't about privacy. It was about keeping the magic intact. Even my friends knew not to follow me up there. The attic wasn't just a room. It was a heartbeat that didn't belong to anyone else but us. He once told me the attic had its own seasons. Spring was when the light felt new, summer when the air was heavy, autumn when the stories grew deeper, and winter when words came slow but strong. I never really understood until I grew up, and realized rooms can change with you if you let them. One Christmas Eve, he read me a story he'd written just for that night. It was about a family who got snowed in but found joy in the smallest things. A warm fire, a shared blanket, a song hummed together. I realized then that stories don't just entertain. They teach you how to see beauty in the ordinary. There was a clock in the attic that never worked. I asked why he kept it, and he said, "Because when I'm here, time doesn't matter." I used to think that was just poetic. But as I got older, I realized it was true. The attic had its own way of bending hours into moments worth keeping. He often ended his stories with open endings. Life doesn't tie everything in a bow, he said. Why should stories? At first, I wanted neat answers, but I grew to love the mystery. It was like the characters went on living somewhere, even after I closed the page. That made them feel more real to me. The typewriter's ribbon sometimes left faint letters when it was running low. Instead of replacing it right away, he'd keep writing, saying, "Some words are meant to be whispered." I liked that. The idea that even on the page, not everything had to shout to be heard. Some things were more powerful soft. He had a small tin of peppermints he kept on the desk. Whenever I came up to visit, he'd slide one across to me without looking away from the page. It was such a small thing, but it became our ritual. Now every time I taste peppermint, it's like I'm back in that attic, listening to him type. One summer storm knocked the power out for 2 whole days. We spent them in the attic, writing by candlelight and telling each other stories out loud. Without the typewriter's sound, the silence felt bigger, but the words felt closer. I learned that stories don't need machines, just voices willing to share. He had a habit of naming the characters after people he'd met only once. "Real names carry real weight," he said. I wondered if anyone ever recognized themselves. Maybe that's why his stories felt so real. They were stitched together from the threads of actual lives, even if only for a moment. Once I asked him if he'd ever run out of stories. He laughed softly. "No, because every day gives you another one." At the time, I didn't see it, but now I realize even the smallest moment, a smile, a leaf falling, can become something worth remembering if you look at it the right way. One autumn morning, the attic smelled of apples from the basket Grandma left by the door. Grandpa said scents were secret storytellers. They sneak into your memory and stay there forever. Later, he wrote about a boy who followed the smell of pie through an entire town, only to find it led to the home he had left years ago. The typewriter had a soft shine from his hands resting on it for so many years. It wasn't polished. It was worn in the way a favorite coat fits just right. I used to trace the letters on the keys with my fingertips, feeling the grooves where the paint had faded. It was like touching a map of all the words he'd ever written. Sometimes he'd start a story with no plan, letting it find its own way. "The best journeys," he said, "are the ones you don't overpack for." I watched him type with that slight smile, like he was reading it for the first time as he wrote. It taught me that discovery is half the joy of telling a tale. There was a single loose shingle on the roof above the attic. On windy days, it would flap and rattle like a slow drum. I once complained about the noise, but Grandpa said, "That's the attic applauding." After that, I never heard it as a bother again. Funny how words can change the way you see or hear something. He never seemed afraid of blank pages. "They're just rooms waiting to be decorated," he'd say. I'd stare at the empty paper and see nothing, but he'd see entire worlds ready to unfold. That kind of vision felt like magic, but he insisted it was just practice, the kind you build one page at a time. One night, I asked if he ever wrote about himself. He nodded slowly. "Every story is about me, and none of them are." It sounded confusing then, but I think I understand now. Pieces of who we are slip into every character, every setting, even if no one else can see them. That's how writers live forever. When I was older, I realized the attic was smaller than I remembered. The ceilings were lower, the desk narrower. But somehow the story still felt just as big. I think that's what he meant when he said, "Space doesn't matter." Imagination is the room you carry with you everywhere you go. The last time I saw him type, the keys moved slower. His hands trembled, but the words still came. He looked at me and said, "Every story has its final chapter. Doesn't mean it's the end. It just means it's time for the next one to begin." That stayed with me, heavier than any book. After he passed, the attic felt different. The typewriter sat still, the ribbon frozen mid-sentence. I'd go up there and just sit, listening to the quiet. Sometimes I thought I heard the faint echo of keys, like the room itself was remembering him. Maybe it was. Maybe I was just hoping it would. I decided not to move the typewriter. It stayed exactly where it had always been, dust settling on its metal frame. I couldn't bring myself to write on it yet. It felt like using it would erase something, or maybe like I wasn't ready to hear its voice without him there to guide it. One afternoon, years later, I finally sat at his desk. My hands hovered over the keys, unsure. Then I remembered his words. "Write like you." So I did. The first story wasn't perfect, not even close, but it was mine. And as I typed, the attic felt warm again, like he'd just stepped out for tea. I still ring the little brass bell when I finish a story. No one else knows why, but it doesn't matter. It's my way of keeping him in the room. The sound feels like a bridge between then and now, between the boy in the quilt and the man still trying to plant seeds in the form of words. Sometimes I'll find an old leaf pressed between my pages, one I must have left without thinking. It makes me smile, remembering how he'd do the same. Little things like that make me feel like stories aren't just written. They're inherited, passed down, like an attic full of worlds you can visit anytime. People ask me why I don't publish more, why I keep so many stories just for myself. I tell them the same thing he told me. Some stories know where they belong. And maybe that's selfish, but I like to think of them as family secrets. Safe, warm, and only told when the moment is right. The attic is quieter now, but it's never empty. Every squeak of the floorboard, every ray of light through the window, every smell of paper and dust, they all hold pieces of him. And when I sit at that desk, fingers on the keys, I realize the truth. The story isn't over. It's just my turn to keep writing.